The views expressed on this program are those of the producers and individuals appearing on this program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Sun Prairie Media Center staff, its video service providers, or the staff and elected officials of the City of Sun Prairie.
Hey everyone, this is Rose Daly, the City Sustainability Coordinator of Sun Prairie, and you're listening to the Sustainable Sun Prairie podcast, the show that aspires to educate, empower, and engage our listeners in all aspects of sustainability. Whether you are a seasoned sustainability enthusiast or just beginning your sustainability journey, each episode will have something new and exciting for everyone. Let's begin the conversation for a greener community. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into the world of electric vehicles, and we'll be sharing the 6 biggest myths about EVs and breaking down these myths with facts and data. There are actually over 3.3 million registered EVs on the road in the United States today, which makes up just over 1% of our country's total light-duty vehicles. EV sales have been growing significantly, with the 2023 sales increasing by 60% compared to the previous year. Now, although EVs are on the rise in the US, there are still many misconceptions about their range, performance, affordability, and environmental impact, and sometimes these misconceptions spread like wildfire. So today, my guests and I, who are both EV drivers, will be combating these misconceptions with our personal experiences and national data. Jessica, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show. Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Rose, for having me. Currently, I'm the Associate Director of Marketing at Michaels Energy. I lead all the development and execution of our marketing efforts on behalf of the company and the utility efficiency programs we support. I have nearly 20 years of experience in marketing, and I've spent nearly 10 years in the energy efficiency space, starting with my time at Wisconsin's Focus on Energy program. And previously, I also managed the marketing for Drive Electric Wisconsin, which aims to accelerate EV adoption by increasing consumer demand and dealership supplies. And then I've been a Sun Prairie resident for the past 10 years, with both my kids attending Sun Prairie schools. And I've also served on the city's sustainability committee since it started. So again, thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. You have so much experience you're going to bring to the show today. Also, I just wanted to apologize to the listeners. There's currently construction happening right outside the podcast studio. So if you do hear any construction noises, that is where they're coming from. Hopefully they're not too disruptive to the show today. So I thought we could start by setting the stage and we can discuss the EVs that we drive. So I'm curious to know, what EV do you currently drive and what inspired you to purchase your EV?
Sure. I currently have a 2022 Nissan Leaf, and it's been one of those where I've wanted an EV almost since they came out. I just thought the technology was cool, and that was even before I got into the efficiency space, and just had always wanted to try it. So the first time when Nissan had test drives available, I took one. It was like, oh, this is awesome. And then ever since, so I think I waited about 3 years for the price to come down enough, so it was similar in price as my previous car payment, and here we are.
Awesome.
And I love it. Yeah.
Yay, that's great. And the Nissan Leaf is kind of like the original, like, popular EV, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it is one of the originals, and they have a couple different battery sizes, and Nissan also does a really good job with their dealerships, and the salesperson, they're certified in EVs, so Nissan provides a whole lot of training, so he could walk me through all of the features that it has and what to do, what not to do, all of that type of stuff. So they were definitely very helpful.
That's super nice. So I currently drive a 2023 Chevy Bolt EUV, and the U stands for utility, so electric utility vehicle. And that's just because my EV is a little bit bigger than the standard sedan, so that's what the EUV stands for. We bought ours in February of this year, so it's kind of a new purchase for us. And I wanted to buy an EV basically like you. As soon as I found out about the technology, I was like, this is so cool. And for me, I really wanted to eliminate my Scope 1 emissions. We'll talk more about emissions later on, but that was kind of my main purpose behind buying the EV. And we essentially just waited until my husband's car died. It's a 2014 Subaru Legacy. The transmission finally gave out at like 130,000 miles. So I was like, this is our chance. Let's fix your car, sell it, and then we'll go get the EV.
Nice.
Okay, so I'm just curious to know, did you have any hesitations leading up to your purchase?
A little bit. I'm originally from the Green Bay area, so I wanted to make sure that I could drive up to Green Bay with minimal stops. So that was kind of one of the hesitations, and I know that's definitely one of our myths of, the mileage. And the other hesitation was the price, but otherwise that came down. And once I found out how easy it is to charge, and because I can just do it at home, all those hesitations were gone. And I also, since I work from home, I was willing to take on a little bit more of the risk, just knowing that I usually don't have to drive far on a given day.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, for us, I feel like we didn't have a whole lot of hesitations. I was just like ready to buy one and like get rid of the Scope 1 emissions. I think maybe price played into our hesitation a little bit, but when the federal government released the Inflation Reduction Act program and the elective pay for purchasing an EV, we were like sold. We were like, okay, now's the time to do it. Like, let's go. All right, so I guess just one final question to set the stage here. What was your initial experience like with your EV? Maybe the first day, first week? How was it?
Yeah, I mean, I won't sugarcoat it too much. I mean, it was rough. I bought it in the December of 2022, and I don't know if anybody remembers that winter or Christmas. It was really cold. It was in the negatives for pretty much the entire end of the month. So it was definitely a good lesson on what the cold does to your battery. And what that means for longer road trips. Because like I said, I was like, oh, my battery can make it to Green Bay. It's got about 150 miles. Green Bay is 120. I'll be fine. Maybe not so much. Took a little longer than I had anticipated with multiple stops. But, otherwise, everything else that I wanted to do, like, it was so fun because, like, you hit the accelerator and, like, woof, you're off the line.
Oh, yeah,
like, it's so much fun to drive. And I was also really some of the features that it had, I like had no idea. Like I could time when it charges, so that way if I didn't want to charge during the peak time of day, I could set it for 10 o'clock at night to go overnight. And so when I saw those things initially, I was like, oh, well, this is really cool. And then I even like made people drive my car and like try it, like let's do this. Like, no, hit the accelerator hard, let's go. Just so everybody my family could see like this is fun to drive.
Oh, for sure. Oh, I love that. We actually had a very similar experience. So we purchased our car in February of this year. It wasn't quite as cold as December of 22, not in the negatives, but it was chilly. And we also had the same sort of experience where we noticed the battery range was a bit decreased because of the very cold temperatures. And we'll talk more about that later when we get to our myths. But then in addition to that, like I just was like basically obsessed with the car because it was the smoothest car I've ever driven. And like accelerating it, loved it. Just like punching it and then seeing how fast you can accelerate. That was so fun. But yeah, overall loved the vehicle. It's been really great so far. So I want to talk a little bit about charging because that's kind of like a big concern. Like, okay, once you buy the vehicle, the question is where do you charge it and how do you charge it? So I'm curious to know what type of charging do you have set up at your house?
I just plug mine into my 120 volt in my garage because I have a attached garage to the house, so I just charge there. I don't have a level 2 charger, so probably overnight I probably get an extra 50, 60 miles for that, and that works just fine. I haven't had any scenarios where I actually need to upgrade to the level 2, so I just stick with the low and slow.
Gotcha. And for anyone who's not sure what a 120 volt outlet is, this is the same outlet you like charge your phone off of, you plug your toaster into. You can charge your vehicle off of that outlet. And like Jessica said, it's slow, but it will add range to your battery. I also charge mine off of the same 120 volt outlet in the parking garage of our apartment building, and we get about 50 miles of range added overnight, which is sufficient for us. And right now we don't feel the need to add like a level 2 charger. Okay, so we're going to jump into the biggest myths soon, but before we do that, I thought it'd be important to discuss some of these terms we're going to be using throughout the episode to make sure we're all on the same page. So there's 4 types of vehicles we're going to discuss. The first is ICE vehicles, hybrid vehicles, PHEVs, and then EVs. So ICE, or internal combustion engine vehicles, these are your standard gasoline and diesel vehicles that contain an internal combustion engine. These vehicles emit tailpipe emissions. So when we talk about these in this episode, we might say ICE vehicles, we might say ICE vehicles, gasoline vehicles. So just be aware of that. The next step up from an ICE vehicle is a hybrid vehicle. This is a vehicle that contains both an internal combustion engine and a small high voltage battery to power the electric motor. So hybrid vehicles do not need to be plugged in to charge. The battery is charged through regenerative braking. So although these vehicles contain a battery, the majority of propulsion will still occur by the internal combustion engine. And typically the battery energy is used to propel the vehicle when traveling at low speeds and to reduce engine idling when stopped. So we're thinking hybrids are really great for that, city driving, local neighborhood driving, but once you get on the freeway or the highway, you are going to switch over to that internal combustion engine. All right, so two more. Next is our PHEV, or plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. This is the middle ground vehicle between hybrids and full EVs. So similar to hybrids, PHEVs contain both an internal combustion engine and a battery, which is used to power the electric motor. However, PHEV batteries are 10 to 20 times the size of those in hybrids, and they can actually provide anywhere from 20 to 50 miles of electric driving, depending on the vehicle speed. So again, PHEVs, you still could be using the battery when you're on the highway or freeway. These vehicles do need to be plugged in to charge, so you will see charging ports and charging cords for these vehicles. They're capable of regenerative braking, and of course, they will emit tailpipe emissions still when the internal combustion engine is in use. All right, our fourth and final vehicle we're going to be covering in this episode is the full EV, or full electric vehicle. This contains a large battery and does not have an internal combustion engine. The electric motor is fully powered by the battery. The battery does need to be plugged in to charge. There is no gasoline required for this vehicle, so there's no gas tank, no gas little outlet. It's only a battery and then electrical charging. And this vehicle has no tailpipe emissions, which we love. Alrighty, a question for you, Jessica. Did you ever consider buying a hybrid or a PHEV before getting your EV?
Yes and no. I had looked into it, but I'm kind of a Nissan snob, so Nissan doesn't have one, so I didn't go with it.
Okay, so Nissan only has the full EVs.
Yes.
I love it. Like, go big or go home.
Right? Why not?
We were in the same boat. I was like, we're getting the full EV. I don't want anything in the middle. Like, let's go zero emissions. All right, I think we're ready to jump into our myths.
All right.
Okay, so myth number one, we're going to start with the softball here. Myth number one is EVs are more expensive to purchase and drive than internal combustion engine vehicles. Any initial thoughts to share?
I mean, up front, they can be more expensive. I mean, they're certainly coming down in price, but definitely in the long run, EVs are cheaper. According to the NRDC, EVs are typically half the cost of a gas vehicle to maintain and repair. Like, speaking from myself, I've had my EV only about a year and a half, and the only thing I've had to do in that year and a half is a tire rotation.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, so that's amazing. No oil changes and none of that type of stuff. So that's been great. And then the other part I really love is I can pull up to Quick Trip, run inside, and I don't have to stand out in the rain and pump gas. And, it kind of going along that line, too. I probably charge maybe once or twice a month to get it, topped off, so to speak.
Okay.
And so, which is probably maybe $5-10 at the most. Whereas every time I was filling up my car, that was at least $35 to $40. And you really never know how much it's going to cost to fill up your car because the gas prices are changing all the time.
Yes.
But your electric rates don't change. Like, typically, maybe once every few years, it might change. So you're going to know exactly how much you're going to pay to charge your EV, where it's a crapshoot from day to day on how much it could cost to fill up your car if you're using gas.
That is so true. Wow. Well, that's awesome how much you've saved already. Very cool. I agree. I think that upfront sticker price is right now higher for EVs than an equivalent ICE vehicle. That's just how the market is right now. But of course, anytime we're looking at a sustainable system or technology, we don't just look at the sticker price. We look at total cost of ownership or how much this will cost over its lifetime. And it's really important to do the same for EVs and hybrids and PHEVs as well. Look at over 100,000 miles. How much savings will you have from not getting oil changes or from not, getting gasoline? And that should be considered when you are going to be making this purchase. So for us, again, we bought this 4 months ago. We have already saved close to $1,000 on fuel costs.
Wow.
Now, I will say once or twice a week, I actually drive 120 miles round trip to come to Sun Prairie for work from Waukesha. So I think I might be driving a bit more than the average person. and that's why we have higher savings on fuel. And that was another incentive for why we wanted to get this EV for these trips that I make. But yeah, we've saved $1,000 on fuel costs and about $70 on oil change costs. And then another thing I wanted to mention is I had mentioned the IRA elective pay at the start of this episode. So right now, the federal government will give you a $7,500 tax credit if you purchase an eligible electric vehicle. And the Chevy Bolt EUV is one of those on the list. So in 2025, we are going to apply for that tax credit. We're super excited for it. And then also, if you purchase a PHEV, maybe you're not quite ready for the full EV, you can receive up to $3,250 from the federal government, which is huge. Mm-hmm. And another thing, you don't just have to purchase a new vehicle. Even used EVs, you can still get a tax credit for them. So that's huge. This will help to drive down that sticker price, put more money back in your pocket, and improve the total cost of ownership. Something fun, I don't know if you got this when you bought your vehicle, but we actually received a $500 Visa gift card from Chevy that we could use for charging stations. So I thought that was a super nice perk too.
Yeah, Nissan gave me, I don't remember the dollar amount anymore because a year and a half is just too long, but they did the same thing. So they would give you credit at charging stations that you could use from an app.
Oh, love that.
So that was pretty handy.
It's like a good way to like ease yourself into like this new type of payment you'll have at the public stations.
Exactly.
So something fun, because like, yes, we've talked about like our savings so far in like the past year or so. We've talked about kind of that higher upfront cost, but I did like a full cost analysis on my vehicle because I'm an engineer, my husband's an engineer, so we like geeked out and we like got a spreadsheet out. We did all like the math, and we actually determined that our vehicle will pay for itself in 8 years.
Wow.
Here's how we determined that. So we're going to be saving about $2,790 per year in fuel costs, assuming fixed cost of gas, which isn't going to be fixed, but it's like around the average. So we're saving about close to $3,000 a year, each year. And then in 8 years, we'll save about $22,320 in fuel over 8 years, which is crazy. Like, that's so much. If you add the IRA tax credit to this, so the $7,500 we're going to get from the federal government, and the amount we received from selling my husband's Subaru, that will actually add up to the amount we paid for the vehicle. We can't talk about specific pricing on the show per FCC guidelines, but we actually determined with the rebate and then selling my husband's car and the fuel costs, this vehicle will pay for itself in 8 years.
Wow, that's incredible. Can you say that about a gas vehicle? Like, no.
I don't think so, because those are like money sinks, right? They're just gonna like eat up your dollars.
Exactly.
They do have, I guess, like resale value at the end of life, but yeah, I don't think you can say those will pay for themselves. So pretty impressive. A question for you. So I know you don't have like a level 2 station at your house, but I do believe you can get like rebates from utilities for putting in a charging station at your house, correct?
You can. Sun Prairie Utilities has a rebate for that, and a lot of the utilities around the state also offer them. So for those of you listening outside of Sun Prairie, be sure to check with your electric utility. They may have rebates. If you're not sure maybe who your electric utility is or don't feel like looking, there's also another website you can use. It's called driveelectricwi.org. And they have a tool that you can type in your address and it will search up who your local electric utility is and if there's any rebates or if there's any time of use rates that your utility offers. And those time of use rates are really handy for the ones that have them because it allows you to use electricity at a different time of day and pay less for it. So, which is really great when you're charging your vehicle overnight because then you can schedule it for that evening charge and then you'll pay a lot of times like half the electricity cost to do that. And so Sun Prairie Utilities does have a time of day rate, so certainly check that out to see if it's appropriate for your household.
Oh, love that. So there's really like ways we can strategize saving so much money with these vehicles, from rebates, from time of charging, federal incentives. Now is a great time to purchase a clean vehicle. All right, I think we're ready for myth number 2. So myth number 2 is EVs are worse for the climate than gasoline cars because of the significant amount of greenhouse gases emitted during their manufacturing process. Okay, so why is this a myth? It's a myth because EVs contain batteries that require mining of metals, different, more intensive manufacturing processes, etc. So what we're actually seeing is a larger quantity of greenhouse gases emitted during that manufacturing process compared to the internal combustion engine, again, because of that more intensive manufacturing process. Additionally, we need electricity to charge these batteries once these vehicles are in use, and we could get that electricity by burning fossil fuels. We could get it from renewables, but if you're not getting it from renewables, then there are going to be emissions associated with the electricity that you use to charge your vehicle. Now, this is the myth, and this is why it's a myth, but the fact is, when considering the full life cycle of a vehicle, so that's manufacturing, use, and disposal, the emissions associated with an EV are typically lower than those for a gas-powered vehicle.
Yeah, I found that the DOE has found that the EVs will create about 3,900 pounds of CO2 throughout its whole life cycle, compared to over 11,000 pounds from an ICE vehicle.
Wow.
And for myself, I have solar on my home, so I actually try to charge during the day because that's when we're getting the most bang for our buck on our solar system. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but whatever.
Yeah, I say that, yeah.
On our system. And so the more people who have solar on their roofs, the more economical it'll be and more efficient it'll be, taking off some of those CO2 emissions, just because they'll be able to take advantage of that and not their local power plant. But then it's also, as the grid gets greener, like WPPI and some prairie utilities are making a huge effort to bring on more renewables, and that will in turn make charging a lot less CO2 heavy. And like you mentioned early on, building a new EV, like, it does take a lot of emissions and is definitely more than an ICE vehicle. It's around 80% more emissions than the ICE vehicle. But like you said, over the life of the vehicle, that ICE vehicle will just emit so much more because of all of the tailpipe emissions once it rolls off the production line.
Very true, yeah. So based on those numbers you shared, it looks like the EVs will emit only 1/3 of the CO2 emissions compared to the ICE vehicle, which is huge. Also, go you for having solar on your house. I love that. Like, that's like my dream, is to have like full solar batteries and just have like clean electricity for my appliances, for my vehicle, not rely on the grid. So that's awesome.
Batteries are next. Yes.
Is that like the next thing on your list, is get a battery for the house?
It is, because I finally got a heat pump like a month ago, so
Oh my
I was
gosh.
pretty excited about that.
Yeah.
And I could do a whole podcast episode on heat pumps.
I'll bring you back.
Yeah. So I just love how we're making all of that better and more efficient.
For
at
sure.
home.
Yes. Yeah, so I guess like the main thing here, and you had mentioned this, is once the EV leaves that, manufacturing line, there's no tailpipe emissions, or scope 1 emissions is the proper term for them. But the ICE vehicle, whether you're driving it for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, will always have those scope 1 emissions, which will accumulate and result in greater lifetime emissions than the EV, like you said. There's one super interesting graph I wanted to share with you. So this is a graph prepared by MIT, and basically on the x-axis, it shows the total cost of ownership for your vehicle. So we have the vehicle itself, maybe you have monthly car payments, the fuel that it might need, maintenance, all of that's included on the x-axis. And then on the y-axis, we have greenhouse gas emissions per mile driven, okay? So that's kind of the graph we have, and I'm gonna link this in the show notes so you can see it. But then if you look at the actual graph, there's kind of 4 bubbles on it, and these are there's essentially data points that represent certain vehicles. If you look at the bottom bubble, those are your EVs. Above that bubble, you have 2 more. Those are hybrids and PHEVs. And then above that, we have this huge gray bubble that stretches all the way to the top of the graph here. And those represent those ICE vehicles, okay? So essentially, this graph will show you total cost of ownership versus lifetime greenhouse gas emissions. And Jessica, I don't know if you've looked into this graph a lot, but
A little bit.
But I will say the Nissan Leaf, I think it's the 2022 Nissan Leaf is on this graph, and my Chevy Bolt are right next to each other, basically all the way down at where the 2 axes meet, at the lowest cost of ownership and lowest greenhouse gas emission. And that's where our vehicles are. But then as you stretch up on the graph, you start seeing more and more ICE vehicles. They have a higher cost of ownership because, again, over that lifetime, you need those oil changes, you need the fuel, and then they also have much higher greenhouse gas emissions. So I just think this graph is super helpful because it will quickly show you and allow you to compare vehicles if you're looking at purchasing one, whether your priority is just getting the cheapest cost possible or having the least amount of greenhouse gas emissions. I think this graph is such a good tool that MIT put together. So just for fun, I think I'll share maybe the best vehicle and the worst vehicle based on this data. So it looks like the best vehicle with the lowest total cost of ownership and lowest greenhouse gas emissions is the 2021 Mini Cooper SE hardtop 2-door vehicle. I don't know exactly what this vehicle looks like, but if it's a Mini Cooper, I'm assuming that its very small size allows it to be cost effective and also not release as many emissions. That's super cool. It looks like this vehicle has 108 miles per gallon equivalent. It's fully electric. And then the worst vehicle based on this data, we have two here. We have the 2021 Toyota Sequoia two-wheel drive. Not sure what this is. This may be a truck.
I think it's
a truck. Okay. We have that one. It gets about 15 miles per gallon. And then another vehicle up there is the 2021 Lexus GX, 17 miles per gallon, with the cost starting pretty high for the vehicle. So yeah, there you have it. And I encourage you to click on this graph in our show notes and explore it for yourself. Maybe see where your existing vehicle is located and then where your next vehicle is. And yeah, it's really interesting data to look at. All right, I think we are ready to move into myth number 3, which is there is nowhere to charge EVs. Oh no. There's nowhere to charge these. Okay, but let's talk about why this is a myth. This is a myth I have heard probably the most out of anything. People say, yeah, I respect the technology. I like EVs. I want to get one myself, but there's nowhere to charge it. I can't take it on road trips. I can't even take it to work. So there's a lot of reasons why this is a widespread myth. First of all, there's something called range anxiety. I didn't know about this until I was looking at EVs, and I was like, oh, interesting. What is this? Range anxiety is the fear of running out of battery charge before reaching a charging station. So if we think about it, when we're driving our gasoline vehicles, there's never a concern of if there's a gas station. It's just, where is the gas station? Is it 1 mile away? Is it 5 miles away? Is it up on the next block, right? There's always gas stations no matter where you go. But with EVs, it's not quite the same. It's more so you have to do a bit of trip planning in advance. Where are the EV charging stations? Can I get to one for my road trip? Or is there one on my way to work in case I would need to charge? So that's one of the first concerns, is range anxiety. The second reason why this is a myth is perception versus reality. So the truth is, EV charging stations, public stations, the number of them have been growing very steadily. But I've noticed if you don't drive an EV, you don't see the charging stations sometimes. It's kind of you don't notice them unless you're looking for them, which is what I've noticed. So people still kind of believe that there's not many EV charging stations out there, which I understand that. The third reason why we see this myth is there's limited public charging infrastructure in certain areas. So yeah, there is a growing network of charging stations, but in rural areas or less densely populated regions, there might not be a charging station within 25 miles. And then the fourth point that I kind of hit on already is just lack of awareness. So that's kind of why this is a myth, and I can definitely see where this is coming from. Do you have any thoughts to share or ways to combat this myth?
Yeah, so one thing when you were saying about how you just don't necessarily see the chargers until you have one, and you really start to notice, I see one over there, is EV chargers a lot of times just aren't as big as a gas pump. So you may not notice if there's only 1 or 2 charging stations at a facility. You just don't see it as big. Whereas MG&E's nice station that they have on East Wash, that's really big and prominent, and there just aren't as many of those. So it just doesn't seem like there's a lot out there. But there are a ton of apps out there that can tell you all the places that have one. So for example, there's PlugShare, there's EVgo, there's ChargePoint, and even a lot of car manufacturers have an app too, Nissan has its own app for all the chargers. And they all kind of have their different flavor of what they display and how accurate. But I will say I found a lot of them to be pretty accurate. The one I typically use is ChargePoint. And what I really like about that app is it does show you all the different chargers that are in the area. You can scroll in and out whether ChargePoint has them or not, but then it'll show you exactly what the plug type is and if somebody's using it, which is really helpful because when you're on a road trip and somebody's at that station, and if you still have some battery, well, you can go find the next one. But so that's really handy. And then also, like you said, like we've talked about before, we charge at home. So 80% of our EV charging takes place at home. So you just a lot of times don't need to worry about what the infrastructure looks like unless you do have some of those longer trips to take, or you're in, maybe if you rent, some facilities don't have places to plug in easily. But there are a lot of employers now who are developing or installing EV charging at the workplace because they know a lot more of their employees are starting to use that, and there are different programs throughout Wisconsin that can help businesses install chargers at their workplace.
For sure, yeah. I'll give a plug for City Hall here in Sun Prairie. We did install 2 level 2 charging stations that are free and open to the public. So we're trying to make charging more equitable here in Sun Prairie too. I just want to go back to the apps you talked about. I also use the ChargePoint app. It is so helpful. It'll show me the level 3 chargers, level 2 chargers, if they're open. And the really important part, like you mentioned, is like the plug type, because that's not uniform right now between vehicles. There's like the Tesla chargers, the non-Tesla chargers, a couple others I'm probably forgetting. One app we like to use is Electrify America. They will only show you DC fast chargers. And when we were going on our road trip to Detroit, like I was like, we only need to find DC fast chargers. So we just looked at their network and just used that for our trip. And that was super helpful.
Yeah, and actually on that note too, I noticed the first time I went to Green Bay using my EV, it was pretty limited. There were no fast chargers on the route. But the last time I looked and was going to take my EV up there, I think there were now like 3 different fast chargers along my way up to Green Bay. So I was super excited. There weren't any in Green Bay, but at least there were some along the way, so it would be able to get me far enough. So yeah, it's really exciting. There's always EV stations in the works.
Yes.
And even the governors of Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, and Illinois, they all signed an agreement to build out some more EV charging infrastructure along the Lake Michigan Circle Tour. So that way, for those of us who love going to the UP and just taking advantage of that natural beauty our states have, they're working on building out that infrastructure so we can take those longer road trips without having to worry about range anxiety or that there's no charging available. So that'll be wonderful.
For that.
I know, me too.
So actually, we are taking a little road trip up to the UP for 4th of July. And there's actually no charging stations up there. Like once you get past the Green Bay area, I think maybe there's one. But we're not taking the EV up there just because of the lack of infrastructure. But hey, in 5 or 10 years, I'm sure there's going to be a good network up there and we will be able to take the EV.
Exactly.
So yeah, we just got to be patient. So we've kind of been throwing around the phrases like level 1 charging, level 2 charging, DC fast charging. Could you help us break down like the different types of charging available?
Sure. So there are 3 main types of charging. So the first one is called level 1 charging, and that's exactly what Rose and I have talked about. We just plug into a general outlet at your home or wherever you may be. And so, but this is the slowest method of charging. It uses a standard 120 volt AC outlet, just like you can use for lamps, toasters, etc. And it doesn't require any additional equipment installation, which is very handy. And it does add about 5 miles of range to the battery every hour. So this is ideal for the drivers who can charge overnight and probably don't drive more than 50, 75 miles a day. The next one is level 2 charging. So this is a little bit faster than the level 1. It uses roughly about a 208 to 240 volt input and a dedicated circuit that you can provide up to 60 amps. So this could be just like what your dryer uses in your house.
So quick question. If I happen to have like a dryer type outlet close to my garage, I could just plug my vehicle into there, right, and get really fast charging? Or not really fast, but much faster than level 1?
Yes, it would be faster.
Yeah. I will also say, like, if you want level 2 charging in your house, you don't necessarily have to install one of those like super fancy charging stations. You can just put in a 240 volt outlet. And then, like, for example, my Chevy Bolt came with 2 adapters for charging, one for a 120 volt outlet and then one for a 240. So your vehicle might already be equipped with what you need to charge off of a dryer outlet.
Yeah, that's right. Because, my Nissan also has the same thing. It has those different adapters. Yeah, we didn't want to charge anything. And for level 2, so you can either charge into that or you can buy the other chargers online or through whoever. And some of these just might offer a little bit more functionality, that type of thing. But if you don't have that dryer type of plug in your garage, or you want the other, official level 2 charger, a lot of those do require an electrician, especially since you'll likely have to add a circuit. You don't want to be doing that yourself. No. Let the professionals do that. And then the last type of charging is level 3 charging. This is also known as the DC fast charging. And this is the fastest method of charging. And so this uses a 3-phase supply of 480 volt and can output over 360 kilowatts of power. And this adds typically I mean, it kind of ranges depending on the battery, but 150 to 350 miles plus of range just within that hour. And I think I forgot to mention, on the level 2, that really only adds about 20 to 30 miles of range per hour. So really the level 1, you're getting probably 5 miles an hour. Level 2, you're getting 20 to 30. And then that level 3, you're getting at least 150 an hour. And level 3s, you typically wouldn't buy for at your home because that would be super expensive.
Also, like, kind of dangerous with, like, the high voltage.
Probably. So these are, typically located in high traffic areas, near the highway exits, or that type of thing, and you can definitely find them on your app. And then your fastest charging happens when your battery is in the range of 20 to 80% already, because charging speed tends to throttle after the 80% mark to avoid accidental overcharging.
Yes. No, that's such a good summary. I'll actually share an experience. So back in April, we took a road trip from Milwaukee to Detroit, Michigan for my little brother's graduation, and we decided to take the EV. It was our first time taking the EV on a road trip. Our battery capacity is about 250 miles. However, it was very cold the weekend we went, so I think our capacity had dropped down to 200 miles, and we'll talk more about capacity in a little bit. But we had no problem finding DC fast chargers on that route. And like you mentioned, they're located in high traffic areas. So a lot of the ones we found were located at Target. So we would just like park our car, plug in, and then like go into Target, walk around, use the bathroom, get a snack, just like you would on a regular road trip. And then we would come out, and after, depending on when we stopped, maybe it was 30 minutes, we got a full charge, maybe at 45 minutes we had a full charge. But it worked out great for us. We ended up stopping about 2 times on the road trip, and we didn't have any issues. Like, yes, it did add a little bit of extra time because it's not as quick as filling up at a gas station, but we really enjoyed taking the Bolt on that road trip. So question for you, what have you noticed about the cost of charging stations? Like, have you found a lot of free stations? Have you found expensive stations? What has your experience been like?
Sure, it's definitely been a mix. It certainly depends on where the stations are. The first time I took my car to Green Bay, since there weren't a lot of public chargers available yet, they were, but a lot of dealerships have them. So I ended up charging my vehicle at dealerships along the way. So those were all free. So that was very handy. And when I had to drive home, I stopped at a dealership, hung out in the lobby and for a little while. And yeah, like I said, that was free. Other places that are more like a public area, and typically like privately owned, those will cost a little bit more. So I don't remember off the top of my head anymore how much I charge or how much it cost. But then I do know the DC fast chargers and some of those, like the level 3, can be fairly expensive. But yeah, so that's been my only experiences. I'm cheap, so I like to use the free versions. And when you walk into a dealership and hang out there for a while, you get free coffee and stuff. So yeah, I don't mind charging at those places.
For sure. Yeah, and I will say, like, with those apps we mentioned, you can filter to like only show free stations that are available. That's super handy. I'm the same way as you. Like, I try to find free stations wherever they are. Unless I'm on that road trip, then I am willing to pay for the level 3 fast charger, which like isn't too expensive. It really depends on which one you go to. Like the Teslas have a different price than the Electrify America station, so just do some research on that. But you can like choose your own adventure and find like a financial pathway that works for you for those long trips.
For sure.
I also wanted to mention that the state of Wisconsin did just receive $78 million in federal funding through the NEVI program, which is National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, to install EV charging stations throughout our state. So this is huge for us. We're going to see a lot of new charging stations pop up in Wisconsin over the next few years, and this is made possible by the bipartisan infrastructure law. So pretty exciting here. Things are moving, things are changing. It's going to be good for anyone who drives those electric vehicles or PHEVs moving forward.
Yeah, so our next myth is that EVs just don't have enough range to handle those daily travel demands. Well, when you work from home like I do, the commute is pretty easy, so it certainly does.
And didn't we both drive our EVs here today?
We did. I even made sure I parked next to you, so that way people could see the EVs. But in general, people don't really drive more than 50 miles a day. And, according to NBC News, they found that the average commute is only 16 miles.
Sounds about right.
Right. I mean, obviously your commute's a little bit longer than the average, but, I think, even for my typical, when I was commuting, my last job, I think it was about 17 miles. The job before that was about 10 miles. And, Yeah, I've never had a commute really that's been longer than 20 miles. So even on probably that negative 10-degree day, my car would have been just fine to handle all of that. Because even think about, like, if you have, like for me, I have 2 kids, so there can be shuttling them to sporting events, or there's parent-teacher conferences, or there's just any school events, or maybe you need to go shopping. You still typically do that all pretty close to home. Most of the time, you're not driving far away to go shopping. So it's pretty easy to just stay within that 50 miles a day. And so it's just really, I have yet to find that it really doesn't, except for the long road trips, it can handle everything you're going to need to do. And as you've mentioned, the longer road trips definitely require some more pre-planning to figure out where those stations are. But that's not very often. Like, how often do you actually take really long road trips? Probably only once or twice a year.
Yeah.
And for us, we just take my husband's vehicle. So he's got a regular gas vehicle that we can use as our backup. And then I've also been in a case where I just rent a car for a day, because it's only to rent a car for a couple days might be $25. That's still a lot cheaper than paying that covers your gas tank, basically. So
very true. That's a good idea, because I was thinking, like, what if, because for me, like, we're fortunate we have 2 vehicles, so one's an EV, one's a gas, like you guys. What if there's someone who only has 1 vehicle? I think renting would be a great option if they want to take that road trip and not have range anxiety or have to worry about that.
Oh, exactly. And depending on what your second vehicle is like, I know for us, when we've taken road trips, like I said, we got 2 kids. I would not want to have to take a road trip with my 2 kids in, like, a small vehicle. So like, we've just rented minivans anyway. So,
okay. Gotcha.
Just to have bigger vehicles. So it's, if we did have to, it's the EV can definitely work for my family most of the time.
For sure. I think another important thing to mention is when you're doing the city and neighborhood driving, you can actually regenerate your battery while you brake. So there's something called regenerative braking. Anytime you're putting on the brakes to slow down or come to a stop, there's energy flowing back to your battery. And this actually helps to extend your range when you're doing that city driving. You won't really get that on the road trips, but honestly, when I'm doing city driving, I feel like my battery range never goes down, or it goes down so slowly, and I'm like, I love this. I'm just preserving all my range because of that regenerative braking.
I know. I love that too, because I'll go around town and then I'll look at my battery range and it's like, oh, it's the same as when I left.
Yeah, or it's like you used 1 mile, but you drove 10 miles.
Exactly.
It's great. I think something we should touch on is how weather impacts our batteries.
Yes. It certainly varies by vehicle and your battery size. So like I said, my battery is roughly about 150 miles if I have full charge. In the winter, what I found is it probably takes off a good 50 miles of that. So it's probably closer to around 100 in the winter when it's really cold. So then I'll just have to think about how that affects any of my travel for that day. But charging is also a lot slower when it's really cold. I found when you need to charge overnight and it's negative 10, 20 degrees, you're not getting 5 miles an hour. It could be more like 2. So it just takes a lot longer to charge when it's really cold. But the interesting thing with EV batteries is they really don't like extreme hot or extreme cold, and I think you may have noted it later, but like if you're in Arizona and like some of those really hot places, their batteries aren't going to be faring any well with 113 degree temperatures than our batteries would at negative 10.
Very true. Yeah. So people always say like, oh, you should only get an EV if you live down south. Well, I mean, you're going to experience issues anywhere unless you're in like the perfect climate where it's like 70 degrees every day, but that doesn't really exist, at least not in the US.
Yeah.
So what we noticed when we bought the EV in February is we had about a 20 to 25% range reduction. So with a 250 mile battery, we were looking at maybe like 200, 180 miles, which again, doesn't really impact that daily commute. It would only play a role if we were going on that road trip. So what I found is that the optimal temperature range for EVs is 55 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. You will have pretty much 100% of that range utilized when you're driving in those temperatures. And actually, I found that 70 degrees Fahrenheit actually allows EVs to perform at 115% of their range. I've actually noticed this. When it's perfect 75 degrees, I will use very little of my battery to drive all the way back to Waukesha from Sun Prairie. Like, it's a 60-mile drive. Sometimes I only use like 35 or 40 miles on my battery. And that's been impressive. I don't know if you've noticed that as well when it's like the perfect summer day.
I've definitely noticed it in charging, because when I pulled out today, my battery was full and I had 170 miles is what it was telling me for today. So I was like, oh, well, that's a nice little perk.
So there's that like 115%, yeah, which I love. But what's interesting is, like you mentioned, the range will actually start to decrease above 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Range drops to 80% at freezing, and again, this is going to vary by vehicle, but then once we get to those sub-zero temperatures, we're going to drop all the way down to maybe even 50% of your range could be reduced. So I'm going to post a graph in the show notes that kind of shows this like curve of how much range you're going to have depending on the temperature, but I think that's good to look at depending on your climate if you are considering getting the electric vehicle.
And I did learn something when you're considering the electric vehicle, too, is what type of heater you have in your car. Because as we both know, turning the heater on will also drain your battery a little bit more. I found that out on that really cold drive. So my poor kids, it was a little chilly on that drive. But there are two different types of heating elements the car can use. So one is like the radiant heat, and that's kind of the least efficient, so that will definitely drain your battery more. Whereas the ones that really don't affect your battery too much are heating systems within cars that use a heat pump. So what do you know? A heat pump in a car is just like a heat pump at your home. It saves electricity. So.
Love that. Yeah. We decided to get like the fancy version of the Bolt. Nice. So we got like the front and back heated seats and like the fancy climate controls. But we have learned that if we're blasting AC in the summer or we have the heat going in the winter, it will take away part of the range. So sometimes I just like only turn on a heated seat and I don't have the heat on just to like conserve battery. But hey, do what you got to do.
Exactly.
And one more thing to mention is people oftentimes forget that ICE vehicles also lose range in the winter. People are so focused on like the flaws of EVs that they forget about the flaws of the ICEs. So according to the Department of Energy, a conventional gasoline car's gas mileage can be 15% lower at 20 degrees Fahrenheit compared to 77 degrees Fahrenheit, and it can drop by as much as 24% for short trips. So again, if you're in a cold climate, that weather is going to affect any type of vehicle you buy. So just keep that in mind and try to think outside the box a bit when you're looking at these myths, because there are a lot of issues with ICE vehicles too. They're not perfect.
Yeah, speaking of ICE vehicles not being perfect, our next myth is that EVs can explode and catch fire, and ICE vehicles only do it in the movies.
I love the way this myth is worded. It's like my favorite, like EVs will explode. ICEs only do it when we program them to in the movies.
Right? I love that, because we've never seen a car on fire on the side of the highway.
Never.
No.
Only EVs.
Yeah, only. So, why is this a widespread myth? For one, it's definitely the high-profile reporting. In America, a vehicle catches fire approximately every 5 minutes. But the majority of those fires, right, will never make the news. However, if an EV catches fire, it will likely end up on the front page nationwide and go viral online.
That is so true. I feel like that's for like EVs catching fire, even EVs being towed. People are like, look, an EV's being towed. It's not efficient. It broke down. These vehicles are trash. So I feel like right now, anytime there's a small issue with an EV, it's going to make the news.
Exactly. And then there's just the perception of the electrical system. So there's that general perception that electrical systems are just more prone to fires than mechanical systems like the gasoline vehicles. And sometimes, maybe this stems from your experience with household electrical fires. I've never had a household electrical fire, so I guess, but I've seen enough movies where it happens to Christmas trees, so, right. Maybe we should ban that. No. And then I think kind of what you mentioned, too, is that novelty and the fear of the unknown. Like, EVs are relatively new compared to gasoline vehicles, so people just tend to fear what you don't understand. The unfamiliarity with EV technology can just lead to those misconceptions and overestimate those risks.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
And then lithium-ion batteries. So EVs use these lithium-ion batteries, which have been known to catch fire in certain circumstances, such as overcharging or manufacturing defects or just physical damage. But these incidents are rare, but they can be dramatic and definitely raise concerns about the battery safety.
Right. It's kind of like, because like our phones contain lithium-ion batteries. It's kind of like when someone's phone catches on fire, which is super rare, but like when it does happen, like it makes the news and everyone's like, oh no, these batteries are dangerous. But okay, can I shed some light onto this myth?
Of course, please do. So
what I found is ICE vehicles are actually 5 to 6 times more likely to catch fire than an EV. A study conducted by the Phosphorus, Inorganic, and Nitrogen Flame Retardants Association reports that emergency services were called to 30 fires per 100,000 ICE vehicles on the road per year, compared with only 5 fires per 100,000 EVs. So again, same number of EVs and ICE vehicles on the road, 30 fires on the ICE vehicles, 5 fires on the EVs. And this is data from 2018 to 2022.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, that's certainly seems to debunk that myth. And also, I had no idea that association existed. So.
Me neither. I was like, this is an interesting name, like the PIN flame retardants, if you look at their acronym. I think like one caveat to mention though, because we're trying to be as factual as possible in this episode, is most EVs on the road right now are very new compared to ICE vehicles. Like, yes, there's new ICE vehicles too, but there's also ICE vehicles from the 1990s and from the 2000s that are on the road, whereas EVs only became popular like beyond 2010, where there was a lot of them. So many of the vehicle fires in ICE vehicles are related to the old vehicles when those components wear out. So we'll just have to wait a few more years to get, I guess, better data on this. But again, if it's only 5 fires per 100,000 EVs, that sounds pretty safe to me.
I would agree. And then our last myth that we're covering is that EV batteries need to be replaced after 100,000 miles.
Something neither of us can speak to from experience because our vehicles are so new.
Definitely. I only have 6,000 miles on my car right now, so I really don't know.
You know what's funny? We also have like 6,000, but I've only had mine for 4 months. It's because these drives I do.
Right? Commute makes a difference, that's for sure.
Does.
So I'm sure my battery would last a heck of a long time if I were to keep my vehicle forever, but at least, so I won't. But, and I think a lot of where this myth is coming from, I think it's twofold. One is the sticker shock of what a new EV battery costs, but EV battery warranties are typically 10 years or 100,000 miles, which really isn't that different from an ICE vehicle warranty either. And the DOE is finding that the batteries are lasting up to 15 years, while others and some others are finding even up to 20 years. So
I saw that too, and I was very impressed by it because people keep focusing on like the 8 years or 10-year number. And like, if you think about it, have you actually had a vehicle you've driven for like over 15 years? Because I haven't. I mean, I'm younger, but like I've had 3 vehicles at this point, and I haven't driven into them more than 8 years.
Yeah, no, I found one stat, and it was the average age of all passenger vehicles on the road right now is 12 and a half years. So most people will probably never have to deal with their EV battery wearing out. And one of the, and speaking of battery lives, your battery for a gas vehicle, probably 5 years.
Right.
So
that's
people
true.
don't talk about how often you have to change out your a gas vehicle's battery. Granted, it's a lot cheaper to do that in a gas vehicle. It's probably $250 at the most, but it's still, you're doing it a heck of a lot more often than you would in an EV. So where things also get a little complicated and could also be fueling this myth, fuel.
No pun intended.
Oh, pun totally intended. I love a good pun. Is the battery degradation. So as our batteries age and they're charged over and over and used over and over, the capacity reduces. And I'm sure you've noticed this on your phone too. As your phone battery gets older, it just doesn't quite hold its charge as much. And EV batteries are the same way. But the percentages are pretty low. So typically over like 50,000 miles, that degradation is probably only going to be around 5%. And a lot of them will level off at 10, 15% for the most part over 150,000 miles. And a lot of EV warranties will include this degradation levels in their warranty so that if it ever drops below 70% capacity, your battery will be replaced for free.
That's awesome. I mean, just hearing this, like, I feel really confident now with like the battery in our vehicle. I know we're also taking steps to extend the life as much as possible. So we only charge to 80%, and we try not to let the battery get below 20%. The only time we'll exceed 80% is if we're going on a road trip. But there's things we can do too as users to like preserve battery life, just like you can with your phone. You can like schedule it to like stop charging at a certain time even when it's still plugged in.
Yep, exactly. And a lot of those car settings have that timing and automation that you can program in, so that way you don't have to try to do it manually to only get to that 80%. So.
For sure, definitely. So if we do ever get to the point where we have to replace our EV battery, maybe we end up driving our vehicle for 15 years, 20 years, what could we expect that cost to look like?
Yeah, good question. So on the low end, the new EV battery I've seen as low as $4,000, but certainly they could be a little bit higher, over $10,000. is also a pretty common number out there. But again, most drivers will probably never have to worry about that.
Right. I think a comparison we can make with ICE vehicles, like sometimes those have very expensive repairs as well. So my husband's 2014 Subaru, the transmission completely gave out at 130,000 miles, and we did want to repair it and then try to sell it to someone. We got quoted at $9,000 to put in a new transmission. So that's not cheap. And EV batteries might not be cheap either, but I mean, if you want to extend the life of your vehicle past the 15 or 20 years, you might have to pay that higher price for any type of vehicle you drive.
Exactly. Something that, we just don't always think about.
So I think now we're done with the 6 myths. I think we did a great job covering them. I'm glad we both have our own personal experiences to share. And again, there's so much data available online to help you with your research. But let's kind of like zoom out a bit and let's talk about the future of EVs, those plug-in hybrids, and those ICE vehicles. Sometimes I hear people talk about like the government banning internal combustion engine vehicles. Have you like heard people talking about this, and do you have like any insight to share on this?
I have heard this one, and it's so annoying because no, the government is not going to ban ICE vehicles, at least not in the sense that's being hyped up by some media outlets. And for one, it's only going to apply to new car sales. So some states are starting to phase out the sales of new gasoline vehicles. They aren't going to be banning the cars that are already on the road. So much like the phase out with incandescent light bulbs, the government mandated certain energy efficiency standards for those bulbs, and so that just resulted that incandescents and a lot of halogens just were phased out and can't be sold in the United States anymore, and it has to be LEDs for those. But the government isn't going to go look in my closet to see if I have any incandescents hanging out in there.
Right.
So it's going to be the same with EVs and the ICE vehicles. So eventually, over time, states will require more and more EV sales, but they're never going to ban outright ICE vehicles and take them off the road and take them off your hands.
Yeah, I think that clarification is really important because that's what some people are afraid of. And I get it. Some people have classic cars that they like to drive around every once in a while. So, I mean, I like the way the government is doing this. And right now, they're mostly just encouraging people to consider those cleaner vehicles through that Inflation Reduction Act tax credit. So, yeah, they're doing a lot right now to help us with this transition. I have something really funny to share. We're almost to the end of the episode, but I just want to put out like a statement that not all EVs are good for the environment.
What?
Do you know where I'm going with this?
I have an idea, and it's so funny that like, how could an EV not be good for the environment?
Right, because we just talked about all the benefits of them, like reduced emissions. There is one EV that is actually worse for the environment than ICE vehicles, and that is the EV Hummer. Have you seen this vehicle?
I have seen that thing. That thing is huge.
It's huge.
And heavy.
It's like a tank. It weighs 9,000 pounds.
Dang.
Like, I think my Jeep weighs 3,000 pounds. This is 3 times the weight of that. These are like a tank. And they're actually classified as a class 3 medium-duty truck because of how heavy they are.
Oh, wow.
So they don't even fall into the classification of all the other like EVs and ICE vehicles. The battery alone in this vehicle weighs as much as a Honda Civic.
Holy cow.
Isn't that insane? Like, I can't even imagine this. And okay, so this is where the problem comes in. The Hummer EV is so huge, it needs way more energy to propel it forward. For example, my Chevy Bolt has a battery size of 65 kilowatt hours. I think you mentioned like a similar size, maybe 40 or 50 for your vehicle. Mm-hmm. And that will get me 250 miles. The Hummer EV can also go about 250, 300 miles, but its battery, I believe, is 245 kilowatt hours.
Wow.
So you're consuming 4 times the energy to drive the Hummer the same distance as my car. Now, because of that, the Hummer EV's battery consumes so much power that the vehicle generates more carbon per mile than a gas-powered Chevy Malibu.
Wow.
Isn't that funny just to think about?
Crazy.
Yeah. And additionally, because the Hummer is so heavy, it's actually damaging our roads. It's like having like a semi-truck like drive down the road, and people are using these for personal vehicles. So it's pretty crazy. Now, I don't want to trash on the Hummer EV, but a really funny like statistic I found is, so like this vehicle, it's so heavy duty. You'd think like, oh, this could totally tow a trailer or like a little camper or something for trips. Like maybe it's good for that. Well, I actually read online that the 2023 GMC Hummer EV cannot tow another Hummer EV.
That's funny.
Isn't that just funny? Like, I guess I feel bad like laughing at this vehicle, but I just think it's so funny. Like, if a Hummer EV like goes in a ditch and it needs to get towed out, another Hummer EV couldn't tow it out.
Oh, that's pretty sad.
It is. And like, yes, it's a cool looking vehicle. I actually know someone who drives one. And I'm like, how's that going for you? But yeah, so I guess like what I want to say here is please, please, please do your own research. Just because something says it's sustainable or it's an electric vehicle, it might not actually be what you think it is. So do that research, look into those emissions, check out those graphs we sent you. The Hummer EV isn't even on that MIT graph because it's not considered like a class 1 vehicle.
Oh, funny.
So that's why it's not on there. But yeah, do your own research. Yeah. All right. Any final thoughts to share, Jessica?
No, just thanks for having me, Rose. And yeah, there's tons of resources out there for you to use. So certainly check out the links that will be in the notes. And for your next EV or your next car purchase, definitely look into an EV.
Yes, definitely consider it. Take it for a test drive. Ask about like energy savings. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jessica. And thanks to our listeners. All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you for listening to Sustainable Sun Prairie with your host, Rose Daly. I hope you enjoyed this episode and uncovered something new about sustainability. As always, you can subscribe to our podcast and listen anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and you can listen live on 103.5 FM The Sun, WLSP-LP, and on demand on the Sun Prairie Media Center app. For links and resources mentioned in this episode, as well as our contact info, please visit the show notes. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.